On this episode of Arts Weekly, I'm speaking with Angie Quinn and Michael Galbraith from Arch.
Folks who've gone on our Southwood Park tour or Ilsley Place, those ones, will know just to keep going basically west on Bluffton Road, and you'll get to Indian Village. And it's a nice segue of talking about Pinchua and Indian Village, because this was part of his reservation, and when the name was suggested for a new suburban area back in the 1920s, someone said, well, why don't we call it Indian Village, because Pinchua had a Miami village very near the site. And so that's how it got the name. So it's just down the road. They're very close together. And but Indian Village is modern, and it was designed by a landscape architect in the 20s. And then the Depression happened, so only a few houses were built. But then right at the beginning of World War II and after, suddenly there was this need for, more housing. And so there's a few houses from the 20s, but there's a lot of houses from the 1940s and 1950s and early 60s. So.
This is Arts Weekly.
Arts Weekly is a production of the College of Visual and Performing Arts at IPFW, offering degrees in fine arts, music, theater, and visual communication and design. IPFW, the energy of arts.
Hello, I'm Chuck O'Connor, and this is Arts Weekly. Joining me is Angie Quinn and Mike Galbraith from Arch, Fort Wayne's historic preservation organization. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Hi, Chuck.
Hi.
Angie, Arch is obviously an acronym for something. Tell us a little bit about what Arch means and what the organization does.
The acronym came about backwards. Arch actually began as the word Arch. Back in 1975, the people who started the organization sort of thought the word stood for everything that they wanted to do. Architecture, arches and windows, the whole thing. And then over the years, they developed what it stood for. So it actually is architecture and community heritage.
And you are in the business of helping people preserve our architecture and our heritage?
Our historical and cultural resources.
And what was the need? What was the impetus for starting the organization back in the 70s, like you just mentioned?
It came out of the United States Bicentennial celebration. Back in 1975, the city of Fort Wayne started looking at what kind of projects did they want to do as part of the national celebration of the country's bicentennial, and they decided that one of the things would be preserving something from our community's early history. They picked an old canal building on Superior Street and started looking at what it would cost to preserve it, what all went into that. And about a month after that committee started meeting, they determined that there was such a great need in Fort Wayne that they needed to become an organization. So we actually grew directly out of the United States Bicentennial celebration.
And indeed, there are a lot of historic buildings here in Fort Wayne. We're going to talk a little bit about them in a minute. But coming up in May is National Historic Preservation Month, Michael. What is that about, and what kind of things will you be doing?
Well, that's a way for historic preservation organizations like Arch and for like our partners all throughout the state to bring a little bit more attention to the fact that there's a lot of our history that needs to be preserved, and that doing so has great economic and social benefits.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to be, Angie, you're going to be actually starting off the month of May with a lecture on Alexander Rankin. Tell us a little bit about Alexander Rankin.
Yeah, actually,
his importance.
Interestingly enough, the History Center is actually the organizer for this particular activity. I'm the lecturer for their lecture series, and they do that every year. It's wonderful. The lecture about Alexander Rankin is going to focus on his work as an abolitionist and possibly involved with the Underground Railroad. Not sure if he did that here, but we know he did it other places. And what legacy he left here in the Fort Wayne community and more broadly. He also, besides that, was a gun-toting minister in Denver, Colorado in 1859.
Alexander Rankin?
Yes.
And he came to Fort Wayne?
Well, he was in Fort Wayne first, and then he went to Denver.
I see. And now Arch is located in the Alexander Rankin
We are located in the
on
house.
Lafayette.
Yep, the house that he built while he was the minister to the Presbyterian congregation here in Fort Wayne in the 1830s and early 1840s. Was when he left, it had other uses over the years, but we've been restoring it for the last decade, and it's our offices now.
Well, that's wonderful. Another thing that Arch is doing that's keeping you both really busy, I'm sure, is working with the Historic Register and the survey project. And Michael, will you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things that ARCH does is we're engaged in a whole bunch of county surveys. This will be our this will be our fifth, I'm sorry to say, our fifth county survey. We've done surveys in Adams County and in Wells County and LaGrange County and Steuben, and we're just starting Allen County. Allen County is a gigantic county in the state of Indiana. We've got 20 townships. Most other counties have 9 or 10 or 11 or 12. And we'll have probably 25 or 30,000 historic sites, and we'll cover dates up until about 1975.
Wow, that's so you're going to be basically cataloging all these sites?
We're going to be cataloging and rating and evaluating all of the historic resources of Allen County, and talking about districts and talking about industrial sites and houses and churches and all of the things that are historic.
Well, what are some of the ones that we would know of?
Well, besides the something that we're going to talk about later in the show, the Richardville House, but things that you would see on your everyday life. For instance, we're talking about some of the fact that some of our great churches in town are parts of historic districts. The fact that they've built a school and a church and a rectory and a convent to go along with some of these churches and have become a part of the life over the last 50 and 100 years. Some of the things like the Wayne Knitting Mills might be historic, or a subdivision like Maple Place with a great set of craftsman bungalows.
It's in actually doing this, Mike and someone from the city of Fort Wayne, along with some other surveyors that we have, actually will be driving down every single road in Allen County, whether it be in the city or way out at the very edge of the county, and they're really concretely looking at every single building that they see as they're making these determinations.
Wow, that's fascinating. But how do you determine?
Well, the National Park Service, and we're working through the National Park Service through the state of Indiana in what's called the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology. There's a set of guidelines about significance and integrity. So when you look at something and you look at its significance, it may be significant in a lot of different areas. It may be significant in architecture or education or something like industry or commerce, and there's a list of 29 different areas that something could be significant in. And then we also look at the integrity of a building. Does it retain its original fabric and its original feel? So you look at setting, you look at materials, you look at workmanship, and you look at all those things that make something keep its integrity.
Now, many of these sites are personal homes, correct?
Absolutely.
Why would somebody want to have their home on the historic register?
Well, one of the things you can be on are two different types of registers. One is a local historic district, and one is a national register district. A national register district often conveys a lot of tax advantages to an individual homeowner if they do substantial renovation in their house. A local historic district really helps to preserve the economic value of a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. So if people feel that perhaps their house would suit or meet the criteria, should they contact ARCH then?
They should contact ARCH, or they should contact the city of Fort Wayne, either one.
Yeah. Michael, on May 16th, you're going to be giving a lecture about the Historic Preservation Month with Krager Smith. Tell us a little bit about that lecture.
Sure. We're going to be giving a lecture on the 16th, as you said, about the progress of the Allen County survey so far. This is probably going to be a 6-year project that's going to encompass 25 or 30,000 different sites. So we're going to start to talk about what's historic, why it's historic, how we're going to cover things, and sort of the methodology that we're going to use to cover this gigantic project.
And that'll be at the Allen County Public Library. And if people are interested in knowing more about maybe how their home or property can be on the site, on the Historic Register, they can come and find out?
They can come and find out, or they can come and contact us at ARCH, or they can contact the City Historic Preservation Office.
Okay. Well, so getting back to, you're driving every street and back road of Allen County, which sounds kind of enormously fun, but time-consuming, and you find something that should be, you would consider to be on the Historic Register or possibly a candidate for. What kind of inspection do you do, Angie?
Well, I've only done a little bit of it. It'll be mostly what Mike and Krager and then some other surveyors that we'll probably be hiring in future years do. But basically, you're on the road because you're not going on private property yet. You're going to first do a visual inspection. You're going to say, okay, let me look at this. This building looks like it is at least 50 years old. So that's the first thing. Is it at least, I think, 40 years old is what you're using, right? So 40 years old. And then you say, okay, does it still have the materials that were there when it was built? If it's a brick house, can you still see the brick? Is it a wood frame house, with wood siding? is that still wood or has it been replaced with aluminum or vinyl or something else? Is the porch the way it was when it was first built, or has it been enclosed? Are there room additions? Have windows been changed? Is it a farm that now is stuck in the middle of a suburban development and all you can see is the farmhouse, and so you can't really tell it was related to a farm at one point? So you have to look at all of those things.
A lot of kind of interlocking criteria that one needs to meet.
Yeah, so those things are actually more important than condition. It can be in really poor condition, but if it still has all of its original things, the bells and whistles, then we're going to probably look at it for its potential on the National Register, as opposed to something that's in pristine condition but has replaced windows or new vinyl siding or has an enclosed porch.
Okay, all right.
Does that kind of sum it up?
That sums it up.
Yeah.
Well, another exciting thing coming up that Arch is doing is the haunted house tour. And Angie, I know that you're in charge of this one, but that sounds like a lot of fun. When's that going to be?
It's May 21st, and it's not so much haunted houses as haunted sites.
Haunted
And we'll
sites.
be in the downtown area, so we'll be spanning sort of the area between Headwaters Park and West Central neighborhood. So part of that is a commercial, area, the downtown area, and there's some houses. We won't be going into homes. We'll be doing the walk from outside.
I wouldn't if there's a ghost there. I wouldn't walk in.
And this is a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the murkier, darker parts of Fort Wayne history. So
do tell.
So we talk a little bit about the hanging grounds and some of the more outrageous murders and mysterious occurrences and all sorts of things.
Well,
Vanishing ladies off of bridges, the whole thing.
Really?
Yep.
Fort Wayne has all of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Is there an age range or?
They're family friendly.
It's family friendly. It's at night. It's like starts at 9 o'clock at night. And how long do you go to?
We're going to go about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Oh,
So we've
okay.
got a lot of space to cover.
And do you go to the Embassy Theater and talk to Bud?
On this one, we're actually not going to go to the Embassy Theater, but if anybody asks us to tell us that story, we'll be more than happy to
Okay.
share the story of Bud,
And Bud is the ghost of the Embassy Theater.
a former stage manager. Yeah.
Former stage manager. Well, okay, well, you know what? We have a lot more to talk about. When we return, we'll be talking about this summer's Home and Garden Tour and the Pinchua House Project. Arts Weekly will return in a moment. Welcome back to Arts Weekly. We are continuing our discussion with Angie Quinn and Michael Galbraith from Arch. Folks, there's some interesting changes going on at Arch. Michael, you're going to be the new incoming executive director, and Angie, as I understand it, you're going to be leaving the organization.
I'm going to be leaving the full-time
Okay.
organization. I'm going to stick around and do some part-time stuff and open a business with my husband.
Oh, fun. And Michael, what are you going to be doing?
Angie and I are switching spots a little bit. She's been my boss for the last 4.5 years, and now we're going to switch that a little bit, and I'm going to get to be her boss for the next indeterminate amount of time. So we're really looking forward to it.
You're also a musician with the Philharmonic.
I am.
French horn.
Correct.
How did you get into doing this?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was playing in the Philharmonic, and I read about an interesting project that Arch had called the Alexander T. Rankin House, and coming back full circle to what we talked about earlier, and I decided I wanted to help volunteer for that. And so the next thing I knew, after volunteering for Arch, I was on the board, and I decided I liked it so much, I went back to architecture school and got a master's degree in historic preservation.
Oh, fascinating. Speaking about another very, very interesting project that Arch is working on, the Pinchua House project, which used to be, this is the house that many of us know as Chief Richardville House.
I think it's still the Chief Richardville House. The nomination that we've been working on is something that is looking at the house from a specifically Native American perspective. So with this potential National Historic Landmark designation, which is what the goal is, it'll be, because it's an important place in American history, because of the connection with the tribal group, the Miami. And so in working with the Miami of Oklahoma and members, Miami residents here in Fort Wayne, that coming up with a name that conveyed that. So it'll be officially the let me see if I can get this right, Akima Pinchiwa Awiki, in parentheses then, Chief Richardville House.
Because that was his actual name?
His name was Pinchiwa to the Miami.
Okay.
He was known among Europeans and Americans as Chief Richardville.
Well, Michael, tell us a little bit about the Chief Richardville Pinchiwa home. Who was this man, if we don't already know?
Right.
And what is the significance of this home becoming an historic landmark, which is one of the really highest honors, I understand.
Absolutely.
in
The National
land.
Historic Landmark Program is the highest governmental recognition that a property can get in the United States. There are approximately 2,500 of them in the nation, probably only 20 or so in the state of Indiana. There's only one more in the actual Allen County. That's the Allen County Courthouse. The federal government recognizes this as the best honor that they can give. Chief Richardville, the house, was built in about 1827. It's a subject of an 1826 treaty between the Miami and the United States government, in which they agreed to build a house for Chief Richardville and 9 other chiefs of the Miami in order for them to stay here in Indiana, which is, when you consider that nationally, that's an incredibly rare distinction, and it's probably one of the best remaining treaty houses that you'll find throughout the country.
And that's on Bluffton Road?
It's on Bluffton Road. It's a property that's owned by the History Center, and they've done a really nice job of maintaining it and restoring it. And it's regularly used by the Miami of Indiana as a sacred site, and they hold meetings there, and they have lots of events there.
When was it built?
It was built in about 1827.
Wow. So how long will it take before we know whether it made it to become a historic
Well,
landmark?
Angie and I are driving to Washington in the end of May, and we'll have to actually defend our nomination in front of the National Park Service. So this is a big nomination. I think it was 30 or more pages of actual documentation that we had to dig up and find throughout all sorts of different secondary documents. So we went through hundreds and hundreds of sources and thousands of pages of document.
This is a big deal. I mean,
This is a
Mount Vernon
huge
is
deal.
is an historic landmark. I would imagine Jefferson's home, Monticello is.
Yeah.
Gettysburg,
This is big.
Yosemite,
Yeah.
it's big.
And I didn't realize that the county courthouse was as well.
The county courthouse is in there, and that, for instance, it has probably the finest collection of scagliola, which is sort of a faux marble, probably anywhere east of the Mississippi.
Right. Now, do people can people see the Pinchiwa House, the Chief Richardville House, or is it open sometimes, not all the time?
The History Center opens it once a month during the spring, summer, and fall. So beginning on May, I think it's May 7th, they open for the season. So it's an every Saturday, or I'm sorry, is it first Saturday of the month?
Yes.
And they actually have interpretation by Miami Native tribal members, and then also who are also, for the most part, descendants of Chief Richardville. So
And it's in pretty good condition
it's
still?
it's in extremely good condition. Yeah.
That's amazing. One of the, hey, good luck with that. That's
Thank you.
That'll be really something, and it's rare, as we just mentioned. The Indian Village neighborhood is going to be the subject, the focus of the Home and Garden Tour coming up this summer, not until June 25th, but we'll talk about it now because it's real special. Tell us a little bit about this particular tour, Angie, and what you hope to feature.
The Indian Village area is actually just on the west side of Foster Park. Folks who've gone on our Southwood Park tour or Ilsley Place, those ones will know just to keep going basically west on Bluffton Road, and you'll get to Indian Village. And it's a nice segue of talking about Pinchiwa and Indian Village, because this was part of his reservation, and when the name was suggested for a new suburban area back in the 1920s, someone said, well, why don't we call it Indian Village, because Pinchiwa had a Miami village very near the site. And so that's how it got the name. So it's just down the road. They're very close together. And but Indian Village is modern, and it was designed by a landscape architect in the 20s. And then the Depression happened, so only a few houses were built. But then right at the beginning of World War II and after, suddenly there was this need for more housing. And so there's a few houses from the 20s, but there's a lot of houses from the 1940s and 1950s and early 60s. So it's the neighborhood where our first really quality ranch houses appear in the area. So it's a completely different style of architecture. I think people will be astounded by what they see in Indian Village, and it's going to be fun.
You know, we're going to show some video of some of these upcoming houses on the tour. What distinguishes a ranch house from all the other kinds of houses in Fort Wayne?
Well, there's a few different kinds of houses you'll see in Indian Village. The ranch house is generally a single story. It's long. It has a low-pitched roof so that it's kind of setting in the landscape as opposed to sitting above the landscape. Now, another kind of house, though, that you see in Indian Village is the Cape Cod, and that is something that's more like a traditional kind of colonial house.
Clapboard siding.
Yeah, and a more high-pitched roof. So you'll see both of those shapes happening at the same time in Indian Village, along with some other ones. One of the houses that will be on the tour is a 1920s Spanish eclectic house that looks like a castle. So we'll have a little bit of everything on this tour.
That sounds very interesting. I didn't know that we had that in Fort Wayne. And how do people find out about it? They just call you, or do they meet at a certain spot and take a walk?
Well, like many of our historic home and garden tours, since they're actually going in and visiting, the insides of these houses, it will go from 11 to 5 p.m. So it actually takes about 2 hours, 2.5 hours for most people to go on one of our historic home and garden tours. They can pick up tickets beginning in June. Generally, we have them at some of the area plant centers. They can call the Arch office. They can order them through us with a credit card on the telephone. They can show up the day of the tour, and we'll have a tent set up in the middle of. There's this big park strip area that goes through all of Indian Village. We'll have a ticket table set up right next to the teepees. And trust me, if you've never been to Indian Village, there are some teepees.
I'm going now.
And we'll also have a ticket tent set up at the Indian Village Elementary School. So right there, because there will be some parking.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. And the home and garden tour is something that Arch does every year. You pick a different neighborhood, and this is the neighborhood you could be featuring this year.
Yeah, we usually try to pick something that recently has been put on the National Register or is eligible for the National Register. And we try to get the whole town covered. So one year we'll try to do something more north, and the next year more south, and so forth.
I see. You will also be featuring a speaker, Jim Brown, from Atomic Ranch magazine. I assume that's a magazine that specializes in ranch houses, correct, Michael?
Correct. You got it.
And he'll be speaking about these houses in Fort Wayne, or about how the style developed across the country, or what?
Well, I
what
think
do
a
we
little bit of
expect?
both. One of the things is that the ranch house has become cool. It's probably something that as people are aging, it's something that their grandparents lived in. So all of a sudden, it's cool. And so we have lots and lots of people that are interested in that mid-50s architecture.
And that'll be at the Conservation Club.
It'll be at the Southwest Conservation Club, which is, coincidentally, right next to the Pinchua House.
Wow. And it's all in the same neighborhood. And you said something interesting just a minute ago, Angie, that the Pinchua House is at the site of the Miami Village, the Miami Indian Village at the time. Is that where they really settled, right there, down there by the St. Mary's River?
Well, I think actually it would not be quite accurate to say that's where they all settled.
Okay.
The Miami, like most Great Lakes Native groups, tended to be, they congregate in larger villages during the summer and smaller villages during the wintertime. The main congregation of villages was really close to downtown Fort Wayne, so like where the confluence is.
Okay.
So Headwaters Park, where the old fort is, the Lakeside neighborhood. That was where the biggest concentration was. But then the different Miami families and smaller communities would have other places farther away. And Chief Richardville Pinchua, and his family group, and sort of those related individuals tended to be a little bit farther downstream, down the St. Mary's River from downtown. So yeah, that's where he
as you mentioned, during the treaty, they essentially allowed him to stay there, where the Chief Richardville House is now.
Well, they did, and actually one of the great testaments to Chief Richardville and to Pinchua is that he maneuvered himself into a position where, as part of the bargaining for the treaty, they deeded him this land, and that stayed in his family for many, many years.
Well, that's all the time we have for now. It's really wonderful to know that Fort Wayne and Allen County, all of northern Indiana, is taking the time and values its historic architecture and preserving the things from our past. And I really thank you both for all the great work. And Angie, I want to thank you for all the great work you've done with Arch over the years.
Well,
and good luck to you in your new endeavor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. For more information about Arch and how you can get tickets to any of the events mentioned on our show, call 888-888-5117 or email Arch at archfortwayne@gmail.com. If you didn't catch us on PBS on Sundays, you can check us out on the internet. Arts Weekly can be seen on YouTube and Facebook, and you can also follow us on Twitter. As always, Arts Weekly can be seen Tuesday through Thursday on College Access Television. I'm Chuck O'Connor. Thanks for tuning into Arts Weekly. Join me next week with guest Don Ritchie from the River Greenway and Ron Reese from the Fort Wayne Community Band.